Aloha, I'm Helen Wong Smith, consultant for COSA's Building Archival Capacity for Keeping Electronic Records, also known as BACR, the BACR project, which is funded by the Institute of Museum and Library Services to gauge the understanding and activity of cultural competency among state and territorial archives in the US. I am joined today by Ann Ackerson, COSA's Communications and Development Coordinator, to discuss the goals of this initiative.
Hi,
Ann?
everybody. Hi, everybody. Thank you, Helen. It became clear in the development of the BACR project that access to an archive's holdings is more than managing metadata and finding aids. It had to incorporate understanding about how various cultures shape the way people interact with archival institutions, especially government archives. Heightening awareness of cultural differences among staff and with communities is a critical skill for successful 21st century archives. It requires knowledge and interpersonal skill on the part of archive staff when engaging people of different backgrounds, assumptions, beliefs, values, and behaviors.
So by reducing barriers, you can increase equitable access to government records to serve all residents, particularly under-resourced populations. Cultural competency is an application shown to significantly reduce barriers to these communities and increase accessibility and use of your resources. So, we talk a lot about, we try to bring home the awareness and commitment that are two essential elements in building and sustaining competency to effectively and empathetically interact with diverse communities and cultures. This work requires self-reflection and in-depth conversations relevant to your state or territory.
That's right. Increasing the competency of government archives across multiple cultures is not an altruistic goal, but rather a pragmatic strategy to ensure an archives workforce reflects, represents, and appropriately responds to the communities with whom it collaborates and serves. And perhaps most critically, how archivists contribute to preserving records in the most balanced and inclusive ways possible. We've created two practical tools to assess your and your institution's position on the cultural competency continuum, and you'll find both of them in this section. The survey tool helps staff and archives better understand their proficiency in three foundations of cultural competency. The first foundation is the cognitive foundation, and that's all about awareness of differences in cultures and communities. The second foundation, the affective foundation, is about the attitudes we hold about the diversity that we know about. And the third foundation, the behavioral foundation, speaks to the actions that we take in appropriately accommodating the different needs of our stakeholders. When we say accommodating, we're talking about a gamut of activities ranging from legal requirements to providing materials in a range of formats for all kinds of different audiences and everything in between.
That's right. And, this seems to be such a big type of endeavor that that's why we created these tools. And the first tool is the survey, which, although I'm not a big proponent of surveys for cultural competency, it does allow you, it includes to gauge where your repository and your staff are at. So it includes questions about your personal level of exposure to cultures unlike your own. These questions support the self-reflection requirement. People often forget about that, that their cultural competency requires a lot of self-reflection, which can reveal opportunities for cognitive, those three that you mentioned, the cognitive, affective, and behavioral actions.
Yeah, surveys have their place, don't they? They can be really helpful, but we've created a second tool as well, the rubric. And the rubric is both an assessment tool and a roadmap to increase your agency's efforts both internally and externally. We want you to think about the rubric as a guide to assess where your agency is currently positioned in its management of cross-cultural differences among staff and with the communities that the archives serve. The rubric's 4 stages provide the roadmap that you can use to plan your actions as you move from where you see your agency now to where you want to go. So it goes from stage to stage, and it's really evolutionary in that regard, I think.
That's, yeah, I think that that's what people, and irritative as well. I think that people have to realize that managing cross-cultural differences is unlike traditional skill sets that can be learned and applied in a didactic or linear fashion, and but it requires conversations on issues and the self-reflection that I mentioned earlier that can't be rushed. It is not a one-size-fits-all endeavor, just as working and serving diverse communities requires in-depth engagement to assure appropriate measures.
So how would you go about using these tools in your archives workplace? Well, we have some suggestions for you, and the first is that we think it's really helpful if you're able to bring together a cross-functional work group from your agency to decide which self-assessment tool, or both of them, that you want to work through, and to create a process for doing so. The group needs to also figure out how to incorporate as many voices into the process as possible, and then what to do with what you find out. Helen, what internal strategies can you think of?
Well, I think that first of all, you have to maintain the cultural awareness. In some places, it's maintaining. Some places, it's even investigating from square one. And this could include gender issues. Somebody had mentioned previously that yes, they had X amount of women and they had X amount of blacks, but how many black women were in higher level positions, and so that intersection. You have to consider all levels of the organization, not how many, tick off the mark of we got this many non-white, or this many females, or this many this physically disabled. It's not that way, and then call it a day. So you have to consider that cultural awareness at all levels, and then recruit culturally diverse employees. A good place to start would be qualification job descriptions. Do you include cultural competency is one of the qualifications? So the desired, I want to say minimum qualification would be the ability to integrate diverse and different viewpoints into problem solving and decision making, flexibility and adaptability to accommodate different needs, demonstrated, this is my big word, demonstrated capability to create and maintain an environment where diverse colleagues feel safe, listened to, and are treated fairly and equally in relationship and developing policy and processes. So often people say, oh, yes, I worked in this community that was, and you look at the demographics, very diverse. And that's not what we're talking about. We're not, where did you work? Who were your patrons? How did you respond to that? What was your action? What were your actions, hopefully, to create and maintain that environment? So, those are the types of things that I believe you start right from the beginning in the job description. Provide career development opportunities for all employees. It always surprises me how the hierarchy of who gets professional development and who does not is sadly uh, um, undervalued. Um, Create flexible benefit and service plans that meet the needs of diverse employees. These are all these things that people don't think about. And then another one is their contributions. Some employees feel very comfortable speaking to larger audiences, not at a national peer or get a peer-reviewed article. They should not be penalized or promotion or consideration because their way of communicating with diverse audiences are not the ways that you would traditionally think of, or the Western academic way. So, and then monitor the change process for when you enact some of these things. So just some of the examples I can think of internally. And what about external organizational strategies?
Well, I've got four to share, and they really all rely on communication and a willingness to communicate. So the first is establish cultural competent relationships with client communities and organizations. Well, how do you go about doing that? Well, it means about outreach and communication. So solicit community input and participation in archives programming and policymaking. This initiative implies comprehensive orientation programs for organization board members, key leaders of various communities, volunteers from different communities, and open access and communication among archives and organization administrators, decision makers, and community representatives. So it's really, I think, in part, the archives taking the first step in terms of outreach, communicating and listening. Secondly, review the ethics and the social responsibility of the organization and the archives. I think that it's important that they mesh better relationships that way, I believe. And thirdly, strive for customer client satisfaction in culturally relevant ways. And lastly, employ cultural diversity competence in service delivery to clients. I think that that needs to be, I think, as you said, in terms of monitoring the process, all four of these external activities need to be monitored and evaluated, assessed, and modified if necessary. There's no
And I
point
think,
in continuing on a
yeah, go,
route that isn't working for you.
yeah, yeah, and I think the rubric really emphasizes that need,
Mm.
so that you can show the benefits of adapting, adopting a cultural competency framework to your activities. Yeah, and I really liked what you said about, the outreach. I also want to encourage people to consider the diverse audiences. Too often we have our rote outreach presentation, and when it comes to cultural competency, learn about the culture that you're working with, learn about the group, tailor it to them. I've seen too many times people don't inform themselves, they don't educate themselves about who they're talking to, and they give the rote outreach speech and it falls flat. So, I think it goes a long way to learn about your community that you're addressing, finding resources in your collection that will resonate with them, and then it'll be a much more fruitful effort. So, these are just some of the things that we're offering, some of the actions that you can take to manage cross-cultural differences. And this initiative will provide a self-directed course with multiple resources. You'll see on the website that we dedicated to this. It's already well populated, more to be coming. And then, these resources are all there to increase equitable access to all constituents of yours. So we invite you to join us and take part of it and see what this initiative can do to increase effective cross-cultural management. And any other comments you have?
I think my only final comment, Helen, is that if anyone watching and using the rubric or the survey have any questions, they should reach out to COSA. Be in touch with us. We're happy to hear from you. We want to hear from you, and we're happy to dialogue with you about anything related to these two tools or to managing cultural differences, generally speaking. As Helen says, keep visiting the website because new material is being added all the time. So thanks.
Yeah, mahalo.